Today we're diving into one of the most incredible military victories in human history, a story so unbelievable that if it were fiction, you'd say it was too far-fetched to be realistic. We're talking about how a 17-year-old illiterate peasant girl convinced the French court she had divine visions, took command of an army, and saved France from total collapse in just 4 days of fighting. This is the story of Joan of Arc and the Siege of Orleans, a battle that changed the course of the 100 Years' War and proved that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can achieve the impossible. Picture this. It's 1429, and France is dying. The 100 Years' War has been raging for nearly a century, and the English are winning. They control most of northern France, including Paris. The French King Charles VII hasn't even been properly crowned because the English hold the traditional coronation city of Reims. And now, the strategic city of Orleans, the key to controlling the Loire River and the gateway to southern France, has been under English siege for 6 long months. If Orleans falls, France is finished. The situation is absolutely desperate. The English have built a ring of fortified positions around the city called bastilles, essentially choking Orleans to death. Food is running out, morale is shattered, and French military commanders are preparing for the inevitable surrender. The English commander, the Earl of Salisbury, is so confident of victory that he's already planning his next conquests. France's greatest nobles have either been killed, captured, or have switched sides to support the English. The country that had once been a major European power is on the verge of complete collapse. Then, from the most unlikely place imaginable, comes salvation. In the small village of Domremy, a teenage farm girl named Joan has been experiencing what she claims are divine visions. The Archangel Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine have appeared to her, commanding her to drive the English from France and see Charles VII crowned as the rightful king. Now remember, this is medieval France. Joan is a peasant. She can't read or write, she's never held a weapon, and she's never been more than a few miles from her village. The idea that she could have anything to contribute to military strategy is laughable. But Joan is convinced her visions are real, and she's absolutely determined to fulfill what she believes is her divine mission. Joan somehow manages to get an audience with Charles VII's court. Imagine the scene. This teenage farm girl, dressed in rough peasant clothes, stands before the nobles and courtiers of France and announces that God has sent her to save the kingdom. Most people would have laughed her out of the room, but France is so desperate that they're willing to try anything. After some theological examination to make sure she's not a heretic or a witch, Charles VII makes one of the most incredible decisions in military history. He gives Joan command of French forces and sends her to Orleans. The French soldiers who first see Joan must have thought this was some kind of joke. Here's this teenager who's never seen a battle, claiming divine authority, telling seasoned warriors how to fight the English who have been defeating them for decades. But something extraordinary happens. Joan's absolute conviction and unshakable faith begin to inspire the demoralized French troops. She doesn't just claim to speak for God, she acts like someone who genuinely believes the Almighty is on her side. Joan arrives at Orleans on April 29, 1429, and immediately begins planning an aggressive assault on the English positions. The French commanders want to wait for reinforcements, but Joan insists they attack immediately. She's not interested in siege warfare or cautious strategy. She wants to drive the English out through direct assault. On May 4th, Joan leads the attack on the English Bastille called Les Tourelles, one of the strongest fortifications in the English ring around Orleans. This isn't some symbolic leadership from the rear. Joan is literally at the front of the charge, carrying her banner and inspiring the troops by her example. During the assault, Joan is wounded by an English arrow that pierces her shoulder. The French soldiers see their young commander fall and begin to panic. If Joan is hurt, maybe God isn't protecting them after all. But Joan does something that becomes legendary. She pulls the arrow out herself, refuses medical treatment beyond a simple bandage, and immediately returns to lead the attack. She tells her soldiers that her voices have promised victory before sunset, and she's not stopping until the English are defeated. The sight of this wounded teenager refusing to retreat galvanizes the French forces. They stormed the English fortifications with unprecedented ferocity, eventually overrunning Les Tourelles and forcing the English to retreat. Over the next 3 days, Joan leads assault after assault on the remaining English positions. Her tactics are simple but effective, direct frontal attacks with overwhelming force and absolute conviction. The English, who had been confidently besieging Orleans for 6 months, suddenly find themselves under constant attack by French forces who seem to have found new courage. The psychological impact is enormous. The French soldiers believe they're fighting alongside someone chosen by God, while the English begin to wonder if they're fighting against divine will. Medieval warfare was as much about morale and belief as it was about weapons and tactics. On May 8, 1429, just 4 days after Joan arrived, the English abandoned the siege and retreat. The city that had been on the verge of surrender is suddenly free, and France has its first major victory in decades. But the impact goes far beyond just one military victory. News of Joan's success spreads across France like wildfire. Here's proof that the English can be beaten, that French forces can win, and that maybe God really is on France's side after all. The psychological transformation is incredible. French forces who had been demoralized and defeated for years suddenly believe they can win. Towns that had surrendered to the English begin to rebel. French nobles who had given up the fight start rallying to Charles VII's banner. Joan's victory at Orleans begins what historians call the Great Reversal of the 100 Years' War. Within a few months, she's leading French forces to victory after victory. Charles VII is crowned king at Reims, with Joan standing beside him, holding her banner. The English, who had been on the verge of conquering all of France, suddenly find themselves on the defensive. Towns and castles they had held for years begin falling to French attacks. The momentum of the entire war has completely shifted. What makes Joan's achievement so remarkable isn't just the military success, it's the complete impossibility of what she accomplished. Medieval warfare was dominated by professional soldiers, experienced commanders, and established military hierarchies. The idea that an illiterate peasant girl could revolutionize military strategy was absolutely unthinkable. Yet Joan succeeded where experienced generals had failed, not through superior tactics or resources, but through the power of absolute conviction and inspired leadership. She convinced an entire army that victory was not just possible, but inevitable. Joan's story also demonstrates something profound about leadership and belief. She didn't win through technological superiority or numerical advantage. She won by changing how people thought about what was possible. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the ability to inspire others to achieve beyond what they thought they could do. The tragedy, of course, is that Joan's remarkable career was cut short. She was captured by Burgundian allies of the English in 1430 and eventually executed as a heretic. But by then, the damage to English ambitions was irreversible. The momentum she had created continued even after her death. The Siege of Orleans proves that history can turn on the actions of a single individual who refuses to accept that defeat is inevitable. Joan of Arc didn't just save Orleans. She saved France itself through 4 days of fighting that changed the course of European history. Her victory reminds us that sometimes the most unlikely people can achieve the most extraordinary things when they have absolute faith in their cause and the courage to act on their convictions. What do you think about Joan of Arc's incredible achievement? Could one person's conviction really change the course of a war, or were there other factors that made her success possible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most remarkable military victories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more incredible stories of how ordinary people achieved extraordinary things against impossible odds. The past is full of heroes who refuse to accept defeat, and their stories continue to inspire us today.